The scent of wax and disinfectant was the constant perfume of Elsie's life. In 1943, London breathed a different smoke, a mix of stubborn hope and constant fear. But at the British Special Operations Headquarters, the fragrance of cleanliness was a reminder of her role. Elsie, 30 years old with well-worn hands, swept and scrubbed, an almost invisible figure in the whirlwind of brilliant minds working to unravel the enemy's secrets. Her routine was a silent ballet among offices full of scribbled papers and noisy machines. She observed everything, absorbing every fragment of conversation, every worried expression on the officers' faces. Not out of gossip, but from an innate curiosity, a mind that even without formal instruction found patterns where others saw only chaos. On that grey winter morning, the London fog clung to the building's windows, turning the light into something pale and ghostly. The wind howled outside, a lament that seemed to echo the city's exhaustion under incessant bombings. Elsie was working in Dr. Finch's office, a renowned cryptographer, but notoriously disorganized. Piles of documents balanced precariously on his desk. As she moved a water jug to clean the surface, her sleeve caught on one of the piles, sending it to the floor with a muffled thud. "Oh dear!" she murmured, kneeling to collect the papers. They were sheets and sheets of symbols, numbers and letters. As she organized them, something caught her eye. It wasn't the main blocks of text, but a small sequence of characters in the lower right corner of some pages, repeating with subtle variations. Elsie's eyes, accustomed to finding solutions in crosswords and newspaper puzzles, fixed on that pattern. It wasn't random. There was a cadence, a hidden logic that for some reason seemed to have escaped the trained eyes that studied them daily. A shiver ran down her spine, the kind of shiver that precedes a discovery. She felt the weight of that secret, a whisper that seemed to come not from the low ceiling, but from within her own mind. If you're enjoying this story and want to find out what happens next, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single chapter. Elsie carefully picked up the scattered papers, her heart thumping a little faster than usual. The distinct symbols, a peculiar mix of dots and dashes interwoven with familiar letters, had lodged themselves in her mind. They weren't part of the main encrypted messages that she'd sometimes glimpse, the ones that filled entire walls of blackboards with incomprehensible jargon. No, these were smaller, almost an afterthought, tucked away in the margins. Dr. Finch, like most of the brilliant, overworked men in the building, was focused on the grand puzzles, the major ciphers that dictated troop movements and naval strategies. He wouldn't have noticed something so seemingly trivial. That evening, back in her cramped, damp flat in a bombed-out corner of East London, the chill of the war permeated everything. The blackout curtains were drawn tight, but the distant rumble of anti-aircraft fire was a constant reminder of the world outside. Elsie lit a single candle, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the worn wallpaper. From a hidden pocket in her apron, she retrieved a small, crumpled piece of paper she'd managed to discreetly tear off one of Dr. Finch's discarded sheets. It contained a short sequence of the strange symbols. She laid it flat on her kitchen table, a chipped ceramic surface where she usually ate her meager meals. Her mind, typically consumed with the day's chores and the worry for her brother fighting overseas, now hummed with a different kind of energy. She began to copy the pattern, drawing and redrawing the symbols, trying to find a rhythm, a repetition, anything that resembled the logic she intuitively knew was there. Hours passed, the candle burned low, its wax dripping onto the table. Elsie ignored the growing chill, the pangs of hunger, the exhaustion that usually claimed her by this hour. This wasn't just a puzzle. It felt like a silent call, a hidden message waiting to be understood. The very air in the small room seemed to thicken with unspoken possibility. The next morning, Elsie arrived at the headquarters with a nervous flutter in her stomach. She had spent a restless night, her mind buzzing with fragmented patterns. She knew she had to show someone, but who? The idea of approaching a high-ranking officer, or even Dr. Finch himself, filled her with dread. She was just the cleaner, a ghost in their intellectual world. Who would listen? Who would believe her? As she polished a brass railing, she saw a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, hunched over a desk in a less frequented corner. He had a kind, open face, and his uniform identified him as a junior intelligence officer, likely new to the complexities of cryptography. His name, she'd overheard, was Private Arthur Davies. He looked frustrated, running a hand through his sandy hair. Elsie took a deep breath. He seemed approachable, less burdened by the rigid hierarchies of the more senior officers. Later, as the bustling activity of the morning quieted down for a brief tea break, Elsie found her moment. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice barely a whisper as Arthur looked up, startled. I think I've found something." She held out the small, recopied sheet of paper. Arthur took it, his brow furrowing as he examined the unfamiliar symbols. His initial expression was one of polite confusion, then a hint of dismissal, as if she were showing him a child's doodle. "Elsie, isn't it?" he said, trying to be gentle. "What is this? Are these notes from one of the cryptographers?" Elsie felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. She explained haltingly how she'd noticed the pattern, the repetition, the feeling that it was a code within a code. Arthur listened, his politeness slowly giving way to a more guarded skepticism. He was clearly trying not to offend her, but his eyes conveyed disbelief. "Elsie, I appreciate your diligence," he said, handing the paper back. "But these are likely just clerical marks, perhaps errors, or simply a system for categorizing documents that aren't meant to be deciphered." Elsie's heart sank. The weight of the established order, the sheer improbability of her claim, pressed down on her. The air suddenly felt heavy, charged with the unspoken dismissal. Elsie retreated, the rejection stinging more than she had anticipated. She continued her duties, but her movements felt heavier, her spirit a little dimmer. As she dusted the shelves in the supply room, she heard a familiar voice. "Rough day, dearie." It was Martha, a robust woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile, who worked as a cleaner on another floor. Martha had seen it all during her years in these government buildings, the pomp and circumstance, the hushed anxieties, and the occasional flicker of brilliance from unexpected corners. Elsie sighed, leaning on her broom. "It's just... I saw something, Martha. A pattern, you see, in those code papers." Martha nodded, her gaze empathetic. "And they brushed you off, didn't they? Figures. These lads with their fancy degrees, they don't always see what's right in front of their noses, do they?" She poured them both a cup of weak tea from a thermos she carried. "Tell old Martha about it. You've always had a keen eye, Elsie. Remember how you found that hidden leak in the boiler when no one else could?" Encouraged by Martha's unwavering belief, Elsie explained her theory, tracing the symbols in the air as she spoke. Martha listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with a thoughtful hum. She didn't pretend to understand the intricacies of cryptography, but she understood people, and she understood Elsie. "You know, my old man always said, sometimes the biggest truths are found in the smallest corners. Don't you let them dim your spark, Elsie. If you believe there's something there, you keep digging, even if it's just for your own peace of mind." Martha's words were a balm. It wasn't about cracking the code for national glory, not yet. It was about validation, about the simple human need to be heard and believed. Elsie felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would continue to work on it in secret after hours. Martha's quiet support, her belief in Elsie's intuition, was a lifeline in a world that otherwise seemed determined to overlook her. The silence of the supply room was no longer oppressive, but filled with a quiet strength, an understanding that transcended rank and education. If you're still with us, thank you for following Elsie's journey. To ensure you don't miss any critical moments, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and hit the notification bell. Elsie's life transformed into a delicate balance of her mundane cleaning duties and her clandestine code breaking. Every spare moment, every stolen minute was dedicated to the mysterious symbols. She started carrying a small notebook, a discreet object disguised as a shopping list, where she meticulously copied down any new fragments of the peculiar pattern she encountered during her cleaning rounds. She learned to recognize the specific offices where these documents were likely to be found, feigning extra effort in those areas, polishing surfaces with exaggerated care while her eyes darted, scanning for opportunities. Her flat became her war room. The kitchen table, once a place for hurried meals, was now covered with her notes, crude drawings of the symbols, and attempts at permutation. She used old newspapers for reference, trying to find correlations between the frequency of certain letters in English and the prevalence of specific symbols. Her mind, sharp and untethered by conventional academic approaches, began to see connections that a more rigid, schooled mind might overlook. She often worked late into the night, the only light in her small room coming from a battery-operated torch, muffled under a thick blanket to avoid detection from air raid wardens. The exhaustion was palpable. Sleep became a luxury, her body aching from the physical demands of cleaning and the mental strain of relentless concentration. Yet, a quiet fire burned within her. Each tiny breakthrough, each symbol she tentatively linked to a letter or a common phrase, fueled her determination. She felt a profound sense of urgency, an intuitive understanding that what she was doing mattered, even if no one else recognized it yet. The war outside continued its relentless grind, the distant thud of bombs a constant bass note to her silent, desperate work. Elsie, the invisible cleaner, was becoming Elsie, the secret cryptographer, driven by an unshakable belief in her own unique way of seeing the world. Weeks turned into a month. Elsie's notebook swelled with her findings. She had established a working alphabet for the secondary code, albeit a rudimentary one. She'd noticed that certain sequences consistently appeared before or after numbers, leading her to believe these were indicators of dates or geographical coordinates. The pattern was incredibly subtle, almost a whisper compared to the shout of the main cipher, which was precisely why it had been overlooked. One particularly fraught afternoon, a new batch of intercepted enemy communications arrived, marked with the cryptic symbols Elsie had been studying. Dr. Finch's office was in a frenzy. The main cipher was proving unusually difficult to crack that day, and the air was thick with frustration and mounting pressure. Elsie, sweeping the floor near the waste bin, noticed a crumpled sheet of paper that had clearly been thrown away in a moment of exasperation. Her heart leaped. It was a partial message, and it contained a long string of the symbols she recognized. Later, in the privacy of her flat, Elsie painstakingly ironed out the crumpled paper. She began to apply her nascent understanding of the secondary code. The context of the message, even in its encrypted form, seemed to hint at naval movements. She worked with feverish intensity. Suddenly, a short sequence of symbols she'd previously deciphered as Plymouth appeared, followed by a series of numbers that, when cross-referenced with local time, pointed to an early morning attack. Plymouth, a critical naval base. Her hands trembled. This was no longer just a puzzle. It was a potential warning, a matter of life and death. The air in her small room grew heavy with the weight of her discovery. The sheer audacity of her finding, a cleaner uncovering what top minds had missed, was almost overwhelming. She had a piece of the puzzle, a crucial, terrifying piece. But how to convince them now? How to bridge the chasm between her hidden world and their world of official protocols and high-stakes decisions? Elsie knew she couldn't wait. The urgency of the Plymouth revelation burned within her. The next morning, fueled by nervous energy and a desperate conviction, she sought out Arthur Davies again. He was in his usual spot, looking tired but focused. "Private Davies," Elsie began, her voice firmer than she expected. "I believe I have something critical." Arthur, recognizing the shift in her demeanor, looked up, a flicker of curiosity replacing his usual politeness. Elsie laid out her findings, not the entire coded message, but enough to demonstrate the consistent pattern she'd identified. She showed him how the Plymouth sequence recurred, and how the subsequent numbers, when combined with logical deductions about enemy operational timings, indicated an imminent threat. She spoke with a quiet intensity, her passion for the puzzle overriding her natural shyness. Arthur listened, his initial skepticism warring with the sheer conviction in Elsie's voice. He examined her crude but systematic notes. The details were too specific, the correlations too consistent to be dismissed as mere coincidence or clerical errors. A professional realization dawned on his face, slowly at first, then with increasing alarm. He saw the method, the intelligence behind her seemingly simple observations. He looked at Elsie, really looked at her, no longer seeing just the cleaner, but a woman of unexpected insight. "Elsie," he said, his voice hushed, "if this is what you say it is, this changes everything." The weight of the moment hung heavy between them. He understood the implications, the potential impact on countless lives, the sheer audacity of what she had uncovered. He also understood the uphill battle they faced, convincing the High Command, the men who prided themselves on their intellectual prowess, that a cleaner had outsmarted the enemy would be an extraordinary challenge. But Arthur, seeing the genuine danger and Elsie's unshakable belief, knew he had to try. This is a pivotal moment in Elsie's story. Don't miss how she navigates the challenges ahead. Subscribe to the channel now to stay updated on every new chapter. Arthur Davies, now fully convinced of Elsie's findings, faced the daunting task of presenting them to his superiors. He started with Dr. Finch, hoping the man's academic curiosity would trump his rigid adherence to protocol. Dr. Finch, however, reacted with a mixture of disbelief and indignation. "Private Davies, are you suggesting that a cleaning lady has uncovered a secondary cipher that my entire team, with years of specialized training, has missed?" His voice was laced with thinly veiled contempt, a dismissal of both Elsie's capabilities and Arthur's judgment. "Sir, her methodology, though unconventional, is sound," Arthur argued, trying to remain calm. "She noticed a pattern, a consistent anomaly that our current focus on the primary cipher might have led us to overlook." Dr. Finch scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "This is nonsense, Private. We have protocols, established methods. We cannot waste valuable time pursuing the intuition of a layperson. The pressure from the ministry is immense. We must focus on verifiable intelligence." Defeated but not deterred, Arthur went higher up the chain of command to Captain Davies, a stern, by-the-book officer who oversaw several intelligence sections. His reaction was even colder. "Private, your enthusiasm is commendable, but your judgment is clearly compromised. We are fighting a war here, not indulging in parlor games. This information, if it even is information, is unverified and comes from an entirely unauthorized source." The captain hinted at disciplinary action if Arthur continued to press the matter. Elsie, who waited anxiously for Arthur's reports, felt the familiar sting of rejection. The invisible wall between her and their world seemed insurmountable. Yet the image of Plymouth, the vulnerable naval base, flashed in her mind. Lives were at stake. Martha, observing Elsie's growing despair, offered simple, practical advice. "Sometimes, dearie," she said, "you don't ask for permission. You just do what needs doing, and you make them see it, even if they don't want to." Her words ignited a spark of defiance in Elsie. With official channels unequivocally closed, Elsie and Arthur faced a stark, terrifying truth. They were alone. The attack on Plymouth was no longer a theoretical threat. It was a ticking clock. Less than 24 hours remained until the enemy's predicted strike. Arthur, fully aware that his actions constituted insubordination of the highest order, made the only choice he believed honorable. He would bypass the rigid chain of command and present Elsie's findings directly to General Stirling, a formidable, almost legendary military leader, renowned not just for his strategic brilliance, but for a rare, pragmatic willingness to consider unconventional solutions. This move was a desperate gamble, a professional suicide mission that could lead to a swift court-martial for them both. Working feverishly through the night, Elsie, driven by the grim reality of the looming attack, pored over every scrap of the secondary code she had painstakingly deciphered. Her kitchen table, illuminated by a single guarded lamp, became a battleground of symbols and patterns. She translated, cross-referenced and rechecked, ensuring every character, every sequence was as accurate as humanly possible. Meanwhile, Arthur, a meticulous professional despite his desperate circumstances, compiled a concise yet utterly compelling report. He detailed Elsie's unconventional yet demonstrably effective methodology, outlining the specific findings regarding the Plymouth attack. His report included precise times, potential targets, and the subtle, almost imperceptible variations in the enemy's usual communication patterns that only Elsie's unique eye had caught. Their only hope was to present a case so clear, so undeniable, that the general, despite the immense pressure and rigid protocols, would be forced to listen. The air in General Stirling's office was thick with tension, palpable enough to cut with a knife. Arthur, standing rigidly at attention, his face pale but resolute, laid out the intelligence. Elsie, a trembling shadow in a nearby anteroom, could hear the raised voices, the incredulous, dismissive tones of the high-ranking officers in the general's office. Dr. Finch, his face flushed with indignation, and Captain Davies, his expression a mask of stern disapproval, were there, vehemently refuting Arthur's claims. They painted Elsie as a delusional charlatan and Arthur as an amateur who had dangerously compromised himself. Then the general's booming voice cut through the clamour. "Send her in." Elsie walked into the intimidating room, her humble cleaning uniform a stark, almost defiant contrast against the rows of decorated officers in their pristine uniforms. General Stirling, a man whose gaze could pierce steel, fixed his eyes on her. "So, Miss Elsie," he rumbled, his voice low and gravelly, "you claim to have uncovered a code missed by the finest minds in British intelligence?" Elsie, though terrified, met his gaze. Her voice, though quiet, was steady. "Sir, I saw a pattern, and it pointed to Plymouth." She explained her intuitive process, the years spent solving puzzles, the noise in the intercepts that wasn't noise at all, but a deliberate, hidden layer. There was no arrogance in her voice, only simple, unwavering truth. The general studied her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, doubt, curiosity, or perhaps a desperate hope. The fate of Plymouth and countless lives hung precariously on his decision. General Stirling, a man of profound experience, tempered by a lifetime of impossible choices, weighed the immediate, tangible threat against the improbable source of the intelligence. His gaze swept from Elsie's earnest face to Arthur's determined one. Their sincerity was undeniable. Against the vehement protests of Dr. Finch and Captain Davies, who continued to argue for conventional procedure, the general made a snap, decisive command. "All units," he boomed, his voice cutting through the tension. "Increased alert in Plymouth, reinforced defences, prepare for a coordinated naval attack at 0400 hours. The room erupted in protests, a cacophony of disbelief and anger, but the general's word was final. Elsie, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins, held her breath, the weight of the moment almost unbearable. The night that followed was long and agonizing for Elsie. Sleep was impossible. She paced her small flat, the floorboards creaking softly under her nervous steps, listening to the distant muffled sounds of London, sounds that were usually comforting but now only amplified her anxiety. Would they believe her, truly? Would her small, whispered truth be enough to avert disaster on a grand scale? Every passing minute felt like an hour. The next morning, as a weak, hopeful sun began to pierce the London fog, the news channels were filled with electrifying reports. A preemptive strike by the Royal Navy, acting on the unprecedented intelligence, had thwarted a major Nazi attack on Plymouth. Enemy submarines and destroyers, caught entirely off guard by the fortified defences and the strategic positioning of additional warships, had been repelled with significant losses. The British naval base, vital to the war effort, remained intact, saved by an early warning few had thought possible. Elsie returned to work, a quiet, profound relief settling over her. No grand parades or gleaming medals awaited her. Her role remained unchanged. She was still the cleaner. But as she swept the polished floors of the headquarters, she caught a glimpse of Arthur Davies. He gave her a subtle, knowing nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared secret, of the lives saved by her extraordinary insight. Dr. Finch, though still outwardly dismissive, watched her with a new, grudging respect in his eyes. Even Captain Davies, in passing, muttered a curt, almost imperceptible, "Well done, Elsie." Elsie continued her quiet, indispensable work, but now with an inner pride that no official recognition could ever match. She was a silent guardian, an unsung hero. The war raged on, but the incident at Plymouth stood as a powerful testament to the power of observation, the strength of conviction, and the truth that heroism could emerge from the most unexpected places, proving that even a cleaner, armed with nothing but a sharp mind and an unshakable will, could crack a code that baffled generals, turning the tide of battle. This concludes Elsie's incredible story. If you were captivated by her journey and want to see more inspiring tales, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. Your support helps us create more content like this.